NATO sends more ships and fighter jets to Eastern Europe as the UK pulls some embassy staff out of Ukraine. With Russian troops massed on the border, the Prime Minister issues a strong warning against invading Ukraine.
We need to make it very clear to the Kremlin, to Russia, that that would be a disastrous step.
Diplomatic channels between the US and Russia are still open, but tension in the region is ratcheting up. We'll bring you the latest. Also tonight, another government inquiry, this time after a Conservative Muslim MP claimed she was sacked as a minister because of her faith. Fully vaccinated travellers to the UK will no longer have to take a lateral flow test after arrival from February.
Unvaccinated, 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 unvaccinated and unvaccinated.
A special report from the Royal London Hospital about the continuing pressures from Omicron. And after too many incidents like these, did you know the highway code is changing this week, giving cyclists and pedestrians priority?
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, messages of support for Chinese player Peng Shuai are banned at the Australian Open. Our former world #1 labels organisers pathetic and weak.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned Russia that invading Ukraine would be disastrous and a painful, violent and bloody business. NATO is sending more warships and fighter jets to member states in Eastern Europe, and both the UK and US have announced they're pulling some embassy staff out of Ukraine. Tension in the region has been building, with around 100,000 Russian troops massed near Ukraine's borders. President Putin has publicly stated his belief that Russia and Ukraine are one people. He claims one of his key concerns is the expansion of NATO, the military alliance of European and North American countries. Many countries in Eastern Europe became members after the fall of the Soviet Union. The Russian president's demand that Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO has been rejected. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
Across Russia, military exercises are gathering pace as its troops continue to mass on Ukraine's borders. On land, air and sea, Russian forces are training and preparing. But for what? Some Western powers now fear the worst.
The intelligence is very clear that there are 60 Russian battle groups, about 60 Russian battle groups on the borders of Ukraine. The plan for a lightning war that could take out Kiev is one that everybody can see. Invading Ukraine from a Russian perspective is going to be a painful, violent and bloody business. And I think it's very important that people in Russia understand that this could be a new Chechnya.
That was a reference to the war Russia fought in its southern republic of Chechnya in the 1990s, where thousands of troops died trying to defeat rebels seeking independence. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have been criticised for not focusing enough on Ukraine. Well, it seems they're trying to change that. The Foreign Office here is now releasing intelligence about what they say Russia is planning, and Boris Johnson is engaging with counterparts about how best to deter an invasion. Today, Liz Truss was in Brussels for talks with NATO chiefs as they announced plans to beef up the alliance's presence in Eastern Europe. Extra ships and warplanes will be sent to the region, and the US is reported to be ready to deploy thousands more troops. Also in Brussels were EU foreign ministers who promised Ukraine £1 billion in financial aid and warned Russia there'd be massive consequences and severe costs for any invasion.
Russia should know, Putin should know that the price to use provocations and use military forces to change border in Europe would be very, very high. They would be totally isolated and it will have harsh reaction from all of us.
In Kiev, the British embassy announced it would join the US in sending some diplomats and their families home because of the Russian threat, a decision that did not impress Ukraine's foreign ministry. Such a step, the spokesman said, was premature and a display of excessive caution. All the while, Ukraine's doing what it can to get ready. With civilian reservists dusting off uniforms from the boots of their cars, preparing for the moment when they just might have to bear arms again. James Landell, BBC News.
Let's talk to our Moscow correspondent Stephen Rosenberg. Steve, despite the build-up of troops, Russia is strongly denying it has any intention of invading Ukraine.
Yeah, the message from Moscow is loud and clear. All these accusations, it's hype, it's Western hysteria. The Kremlin insists it has no plans whatsoever to invade Ukraine. And as so often happens, whenever Vladimir Putin's Russia is accused of something, what does Russia do? It points a finger back. So Moscow is accusing the Ukrainian army of massing forces and planning to attack areas of eastern Ukraine that are under the control of pro-Russia separatist rebels. The rhetoric is off the scale. Now, that doesn't mean that war is inevitable. A diplomatic solution to this crisis hasn't been excluded. One other point to make, that in Russia, Vladimir Putin may control the messaging, but he doesn't control the markets. And all this talk of a possible war, a possible invasion, that is dragging down Russia's financial markets. So, Russian stocks were down today. The Russian ruble was down against the pound and the dollar. And that reflects, I think, a general nervousness here about what may come next.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, thank you. Here, the Prime Minister says he takes an allegation from a Tory MP that her Muslim faith led to her being sacked as a minister extremely seriously. He's ordered an inquiry into the claims by Nusrat Ghani that, in her words, her Muslimness was raised as an issue. It comes at the start of what could be a critical week for Boris Johnson. As well as the inquiry into the allegations by Ms Ghani, another Tory MP, William Ragg, has spoken to the police today about his allegations that members of the government tried to blackmail MPs into supporting the Prime Minister by threatening to withdraw finance and projects from their constituencies. And then, of course, we're still awaiting Sue Gray's report into the allegations about parties at Downing Street. Well, our political editor Laura Kuenssberg is in Westminster for us. Laura, it's hard to keep up.
Fiona, it is indeed a critical week for Boris Johnson, and a very difficult one too. As you suggest, the list of problems that Downing Street is having to confront is getting longer and longer and longer and longer. And at Westminster tonight, there is little sense that Number 10 is in control of events. There is a din, a deafening volume of claims against Downing Street. At the start of the week that could overwhelm the Prime Minister. Another investigation into charged claims of racist attitudes at the top. The question, how and why did one of Boris Johnson's ministers, Nusrat Ghani, a woman and a Muslim, lose her job?
We take these allegations extremely seriously. I took them very seriously when they were raised with me 18 months ago. Very glad there's an investigation taking place now.
The former Transport Minister says she was told, when losing her job, that her Muslimness was raised as an issue at a meeting in Downing Street, and that her Muslim woman minister status was making colleagues feel uncomfortable. The chief whip, in charge of party discipline, who normally keeps silent in public, said that was categorically untrue and revealed he was the person she spoke to. Despite investigations, there have long been claims the Tory party doesn't take Islamophobia seriously enough.
Islamophobic racism is not viewed as seriously as other forms of bigotry, and again we see that here. When it's raised as an issue, it's made clear that it is a career-ending issue.
But pressure's building elsewhere too. Other Conservatives unhappy about Mr Johnson's operation have even called the police. Meeting the Met today.
The reports of which I'm aware would seem to constitute blackmail.
Claims from a younger generation of MPs that traditional arm twisting by party managers has crossed a line into something more sinister. Number 10 says there has been no evidence of that. But there was more unexpected turbulence. This time from the red end of Parliament. A government minister quit in the House of Lords, furious at what he sees as terrible mismanagement of millions of pounds of government-backed COVID loans.
Thank you and goodbye.
He says it's nothing to do with Number 10's current woes, but could others say thank you and goodbye before too long? Number 10's problems are much more than political noise. There is nervous anticipation in there over an official report into what really happened in Downing Street during lockdown. Some Tory MPs have privately concluded already that Boris Johnson's time is up. But many more of the disgruntled are waiting and watching to see what that official inquiry led by the senior civil servant Sue Gray says. The contents of that could spare or break the leadership of Boris Johnson. There are, of course, those who've long been trying to hasten Boris Johnson from office. Dominic Cummings, his former advisor, now enemy, has given written evidence to the inquiry. But neither he knows nor he knows what the report will eventually conclude. It seems unlikely to be the answer to all of Downing Street's prayers. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Travellers to the UK will no longer have to take COVID tests after arrival if they've been fully vaccinated. The government says the changes will take effect from February the 11th, in time for school half-term holidays. Travel firms have welcomed the announcement, but public health experts say testing remains important. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin reports.
Even a day of less than glorious weather couldn't dampen the mood of tourism businesses in this corner of southern Spain today. They hope a further easing of travel restrictions will mean more Brits come over for half-term.
It's going to make such a difference to so many people, to the travellers, to the people with businesses over here, and obviously in other countries as well. It's going to be a major boost.
From the 11th of February, fully vaccinated people will no longer have to pay to take a COVID test after arriving in the UK.
Oh yes, fantastic.
To the relief of passengers we spoke to at Gatwick Airport.
Save some money, save time, save hassles, especially, I'm just me, but if it was a family, oh my goodness, the expense of it.
I think they should be scrapped. It's pointless to have them, frankly, particularly after all the palaver we've been through with the vaccinations and the process.
Those who haven't had both jabs will no longer have to take a COVID test on day 8 after arriving. People planning holidays or other trips will still need to pay attention to the entry requirements and COVID rules in the place they're visiting. But the travel industry sees today's announcement as a significant welcome move. Airlines say it brings international travel back towards near normality for fully vaccinated travellers.
We have seen every time that the government have removed these restrictions on travel as well, that there's been a surge and a boost in the sales, and I don't think that's going to be any different right now.
The government says the vaccine rollout has made these latest changes possible, but one public health expert urged caution.
We are not out of the woods in terms of the numbers of people with COVID. And although this is welcome news for a sector, it shouldn't be seen generally as yet another signal that it's all okay, because I think we've heard warnings today. We do need to still take care.
Passenger locator forms will still be required. The Omicron variant put yet another dampener on the travel sector's fortunes. Today's news has fuelled hopes its recovery can take off again. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Scotland is easing most of its remaining COVID restrictions, which means the nightclubs can now reopen and crowd limits on large indoor events have been scrapped. But people are still being asked to work from home where possible, and although table service is no longer necessary in most venues, face masks are still required in indoor public places, including in secondary schools. Let's take a look now at today's coronavirus figures. There were almost 88,500 new infections in the latest 24-hour period, so there were just over 93,000 new cases on average per day in the last week. More than 17,500 people are in hospital with COVID. Another 56 deaths were reported. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. On average in the past week, there were 263 deaths per day. On vaccinations, nearly 37 million people have had a booster jab. That's 64.2% of those aged 12 and over. Time is 14 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The Prime Minister has warned Russia that invading Ukraine would be a disastrous step as the UK withdraws staff from its embassy in Ukraine. And she was the first British woman to swim the Channel, but her children and grandchildren had no idea.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, a weekend marred by antisocial incidents in the Premier League. We take a look at disorder in football, with clubs and police concerned about fan behaviour.
Plan B COVID restrictions in England are due to be lifted later this week in a move the government hopes will gradually see the country move beyond the pandemic. The World Health Organisation's COVID special envoy says light is at the end of the tunnel for the UK in tackling the disease. But officials here remain cautious, in part because of the number of unvaccinated people, estimated to be around 5 million. In the first of two special reports, my colleague Clive Myrie, cameraman David McElveen and producer Sam Peranti have returned to the Royal London Hospital, talking to staff and patients about the continuing pressures on the NHS of the Omicron variant and what life might be like after COVID.
At the Royal London Hospital, a multi-bed intensive care unit sits abandoned and silent. The worst has passed in this pandemic. But is it over?
So this ward down here, all the way along there, full of patients this time last year. Correct, one of 8 wards that we ran at the time.
Now there's just one ward with 6 patients.
Those who are vaccinated.
Consultant Nick Bunker, who worked through the darkest times, points out what unites 5 of them.
Unvaccinated, 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 unvaccinated and unvaccinated. Does it make you angry? I think it's mixed emotions. COVID isn't universally the only disease where people make poor decisions. Right. But it's resources that we're using to treat people we don't have to.
So big breath in, tight seal, and cough. Good.
COVID vaccines have now allowed many millions to breathe easy in the pandemic, relieving pressure on the NHS. But Gonan Haimes, a once healthy 58-year-old, chose another path that nearly killed him.
I was close to death.
So why did you not take the vaccine?
Fear of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown. So you were just worried about this thing being put in your arm?
Uncertainty. Better take the vaccine.
Better take the vaccine.
I think so.
Asif Hussain would have had no qualms about getting a jab. Still in his 20s, he's on his feet now, just about. We last saw him in hospital a year ago, infected before the vaccine rollout. We didn't think we'd ever see him again. What did you think when you saw the video of you intubated, asleep at the Royal London? What was that like when you saw it? What did you think?
It was unbelievable. I had to watch it back a few times just for it to register in my head. No, that's you asleep, that's you limp laying there. So it was shocking, and it did take a while for it to register in my head. You know what, this is what you have been through.
The rest of society is moving on. We've got to live with this thing now. No suggestion that there's going to be another lockdown, potentially.
Yeah.
But is there a sense, because of the long COVID, that you will always be blighted by this thing?
Of course. I haven't been able to go back to work. So I was a gas engineer by trade, so, you know, a very physical job. With my condition at the moment, I don't think I'll be going back to work, that type of physical work, anytime soon, yeah. I remember my wife telling me they called her and they told her and mum to come and say their goodbyes to me. And I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for them, you know. But, you know, it's all thanks to God I've made it through.
The pandemic has forced much self-examination. What are our thresholds for lockdowns and mandates and COVID rules? We all looked within, appraising our own capacity to cope, and the NHS has had to do the same, scanning forensically and examining its practices and procedures. And one of the biggest questions is whether COVID vaccinations should be mandatory for staff. The government says yes.
Actually, yeah, please, because it's fairly urgent.
But consultant Mari Healy,
still coming, go, go, go,
who helped lead NHS troops at the Royal London in the battle against COVID, thinks differently.
I think the difficulty with the mandatory vaccination is we're going to lose staff, and I think we can't afford to.
Do you know staff who've made it clear that they're going to leave?
Yes, definitely. I believe that to be true, and we have already lost some.
bit of a numbers game, isn't it, tonight?
Staffing pressures made worse by the highly infectious Omicron variant.
I'm 6 nurses down. I have no one.
Fears over rising cases after Plan B restrictions are lifted. And longer-term, ever-growing waiting lists all mean tough times ahead.
Ready, break, flip.
So, make no mistake, the worst of the COVID pandemic may be over, with fewer patients needing the most intensive care.
You should feel it coming out, but it won't be painful. Okay? And then after that,
But the pressure is still on the NHS in so many other ways. Today, 48 hours after we first met Gonan, he's having his artificial airway removed. He'd spent over a month on a ventilator.
I can breathe. It's a miracle.
It's a miracle. COVID didn't beat him. Can the NHS say the same?
I'm alive.
Clive Myrie, BBC News.
The WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has won the right to ask the Supreme Court to block his extradition to the US. A ruling in the High Court today means Mr Assange, who's wanted in the US for the publication of classified documents, can petition the UK's highest court for a hearing, stalling any extradition from the UK for now. It doesn't mean he will definitely be granted a hearing, but it does mean a delay of many more months before his case can come to a conclusion. New details have emerged about the Liverpool bomber who died when his device exploded outside a hospital in the city last November. According to court documents obtained by the BBC, the Home Office twice rejected Imad al-Suailmin's claims for asylum. The documents show al-Suailmin could not back up his claim of being from Syria in 2014. He was in fact from Iraq. But the Home Office had not removed him before he tried again under a new name in 2017. The Home Office says it won't comment on his case. The Metropolitan Police have apologised for using sexist and derogatory language about a woman they were arresting and strip searching in 2013. Assistant Professor Constancia Duffy complained, but an officer was cleared of gross misconduct in 2018. Now CCTV has emerged of the incident. The Met has paid compensation and apologised unreservedly. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford joins me now. And Daniel, the details of this case are horrendous.
Yeah, the case dates back to 2013 when Dr. Koshka Duffy was a music student, but she is now an assistant professor. She was trying to help a 15-year-old boy who was being stopped and searched, but she ended up being arrested herself for obstructing the police. She didn't cooperate, and they carried her into the police station, and the custody sergeant decided to authorise female officers to cut off her clothes to check whether she was carrying anything. She's been fighting a legal case for almost 9 years, but only last year did she manage to get hold of the CCTV and, crucially, to hear what the officers were saying at that time. And the custody sergeant says she's resisting, resistance is futile, treat her like a terrorist. And then you hear the officers laughing about her body hair, they're laughing about her underwear, they're saying that her clothes stink. And it's because of that the Metropolitan Police has now agreed to pay compensation and to apologise unreservedly for the sexist, derogatory and unacceptable language used. And of course this comes at the end of a terrible year for the Metropolitan Police, in which an officer was convicted of kidnapping and killing Sarah Everard, and another officer has been charged with multiple counts of rape.
Daniel, thank you. Tributes have been paid to the French designer Manfred Mugler, who's died at the age of 73. He launched his fashion brand in the 1970s and became known for his daring, theatrical designs. The Mugler fashion house described him as a true visionary. Changes to the highway code are due to be introduced later this week, aimed at improving safety. A hierarchy of road users will be introduced, with those most at risk in the event of a collision, that's pedestrians and cyclists, given priority. Road safety charities say too many motorists have no idea about the changes. So Danny Savage has the details for you.
Avoiding disaster on two wheels is at the heart of the new changes to the highway code. Cyclists and pedestrians take far more of a priority over drivers. But are you aware of the changes?
To stop that sort of incident happening, one of the new rules is that you should use your left hand to open the driver's side door, and that forces you to look over your shoulder to check your blind spot to see if anyone's there.
Cyclists in some situations are being encouraged to position themselves in the middle of their lane and to cycle two abreast. Motorists are being told to give them more than 4 feet of clearance when they overtake. Jamie has multiple sclerosis and relies on pedal power to get around.
Some places it's just really important that you do take what's called primary position. On some places, in some roads and some junctions, you need to be there where you can be seen. And it's really important that that's codified in these new changes so that everybody's aware that people are there for a reason.
The rules at side road junctions like this are changing too. At the moment, if I'm crossing the road, any vehicle turning in has to give way to me. But from Saturday, if I'm just standing here looking as though I'm about to cross, any vehicle turning in would have to give me priority. As a driver, what do you think?
I think it's going to cause more accidents.
What, the changes to the law?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people are just not going to realise with the cyclists, I don't think.
It sounds sensible in theory, it's just practice. Whether drivers carry on doing what they used to, whether pedestrian cyclists get a full sense of security now, it's a question of getting people to change their habits and think.
There will be an awareness campaign about the highway code changes, but critics say that's too late and not enough people know what's going to be different. Danny Savage, BBC News, York.
A British woman with incurable cancer and her 2 teammates have broken the world record for rowing across the Atlantic. Cat Cordiner, Abby Johnston and Charlotte Irving took just 42 days to complete the 3,000-mile trip, knocking 7 days off the previous record. They've raised over £50,000 for cancer charities. A plaque has been unveiled today to honour the first British woman to swim the Channel. Mercedes Gleitz made the crossing in 1927 and became a major celebrity in the years after for her multiple endurance swimming achievements. But then she slipped into obscurity, keeping her past a secret from her children and her grandchildren. Her life is being commemorated in a new film due to be released later this year. David Silito reports.
Mercedes Gleitz, the first British woman to swim the Channel, the Straits of Gibraltar, all the way around the Isle of Man. She was in the 20s and 30s famous, a regular on the newsreels. They even covered her wedding. Her honeymoon, another long-distance swim.
I'm leaving today for Turkey to attend the Hellespont, and I hope to win for England this additional swimming honour.
Very, very nice. And then she disappeared from public life. Indeed, even her own family only realised quite what she had achieved when they found her archive after she died.
I knew my grandmother well, spent a lot of time with her, but she never spoke to me about swimming.
You knew nothing about the swimming?
Nothing. She never spoke to me about swimming at all. In fact, she lied about the fact that she was a swimmer to the neighbours that she lived with. You know, she was challenged. You know, you're Mercedes Gleitz, aren't you?
She would deny who she was.
It's laughable because it's obvious who she was, but she denied who she was because she didn't want that life anymore.
Now her life and the story of her repeated attempts to prove she really had swum the Channel has been turned into a film. Kirsten Callahan has spent 3 years training and swimming the swims.
Sometimes if I lost my nerve, I would have to say, what would Mercedes do? What would Mercedes do? Because she always stayed calm. It just made me appreciate Mercedes more for what she did and how brave she was to do it and do it alone.
Yes, she did it all on her own, a secretary who swam in her spare time and used her fame to raise money to build housing for the homeless, finally receiving a little of the recognition she's more than owed. David Silito, BBC News, Brighton.
What an amazing woman. Right, let's take a look at the weather, shall we? Ben Rich is here. Hi, Ben.
Hi there, Fiona. Thank you. It's been a really gloomy day once again for many parts of the UK. And if you've been stuck underneath cloud like this and you've had light winds, nothing to turn the air over, you probably don't need me to tell you how cold it's been. Parts of mid-Wales didn't get above freezing today. Compare that with Aberdeen, where temperatures got close to 12 degrees. The difference, well, it's clear to see. Some sunshine and also actually a bit of a breeze to turn things over. We have seen some brightness in eastern Scotland today, parts of northeast England, Northern Ireland, further south, stuck under those grey, leaden skies. That's where it felt really chilly. Tonight, though, actually where you keep cloud, that'll hold the temperatures up. It's the clear places, maybe parts of northeast England, that will see temperatures dropping away for a touch of frost, some fog patches as well, much milder up towards the northwest of the UK, where it will be turning a little breezy through the night. Tomorrow, well, it is more of the same, more of what we've been so used to lately. A lot of dry but rather cloudy weather, the odd fog patch, grey leaden skies and light winds further south, making for another rather chilly day. Some sunshine, northeast Wales, northeast England, Northern Ireland, southern and eastern Scotland. It will be turning increasingly breezy across the northern half of the UK, with some rain into the north and the west of Scotland. Temperatures really struggling in those grey areas, 3 or 4 degrees, a little milder, northwestern areas 8 or 9. Now, as we get on into Wednesday, actually it looks like our big lump of cloud will tend to retreat southwards, a better chance of sunshine, but as you can see, some rain into parts of Scotland, maybe Northern Ireland later, and it will be really quite windy here at this stage, with gales possible in exposed spots. Wednesday night into Thursday takes this weather front further south, but it will be weakening. Not much rain getting down into the south of the UK. A continuation of what's been a really dry January so far. Many places have only seen half the rainfall they might normally expect by this point in the month. And then for the end of the week, well, as you can see, still plenty of dry weather around. A better chance of sunshine, I think, on Thursday. Cloud returns from the west on Friday, with some rain again into parts of northern Scotland. But mostly dry. Fiona.
Ben, thanks very much. A reminder of our top story this evening. As Russian troops mass on the border with Ukraine, the Prime Minister issues a strong warning against invading. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me, and on BBC One, we can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.